Okay. So the class is being um, recorded as usual. And this is me again, Dr. Sameh, and this is A230A. And this is a makeup for the class that we didn't do on Sunday because you guys had the midterm then, right? So let me first of all ask you about your performance in the midterm. Did you do well? Do you think that you did well? Come to the mic and share. Was it easy, difficult?
I
Yeah.
think it was
It was
good.
easy, doctor.
I feel I did.
Yeah, let's take one person at a time. Let's start with Lujine and go to Sophia. Lujine.
I think it was good, and I tried my best as well. I find it middle, not easy or hard.
It's about writing. It's about, like we always say, you unpack the prompt, you read it very well, and then you try to operate within the parameters that we always set. You need to be clear, relevant, and comprehensive, right?
Yes,
Yeah. And you try your best and hope for the best, right?
yes.
Good. Okay, who else would like to share about the MTA? Let's have Safia and then move on to Khalid. Yeah, Safia.
Yes, doctor. Doctor, for me, I think it was easy. It was basic, but I was really confused for a few things. Like for the
Hmm.
word count, it said 300 to 350, but I've written 400 words, the word count. Is it okay or
Well,
not?
it depends on what you wrote, and it depends on how compact and how to the point and relevant you are. So, like I always say, it's not about writing too little or too much. It's about writing and being to the point and being relevant. If you're comprehensive and relevant and clear, you are on your way towards earning
So, doctor, the
the
word count doesn't
highest
matter,
marks.
right?
Sometimes it matters because obviously, if you write 400 words, it means that you're writing every single thing on this or that work, which means that you are giving us everything and you're telling us, please choose the answer that you like, choose the part
Mm-hmm.
that you like, right? Which is obviously,
Mm-hmm. Yes, doctor.
yeah, very smart. Sometimes it's very smart, right?
Thank you,
Uh,
doctor.
you're welcome. Yeah, Khalid, go ahead.
I have a question about the MTA. In the short answers, the doctor, the Dr. Mustafa said that it's
Mm.
okay it's okay to write in 100. Is it okay? Because I wrote only 100 words.
Again, are you relevant? Are you clear? Are you comprehensive? Comprehensiveness means that you cover all the aspects of the question. Did you do that? Do you feel that you have done that?
Yeah, I cover it. But I've wrote it.
So you don't
But
have
I've
a
only
problem. 100 words is geographically, and on the page, it's like half a page, right? Or
uh,
less.
the one page is for the first question, but
Mhm.
the second one half first page and another or sorry another page. Sorry.
I mean, okay, let's agree on that. The short answers or answer question is you have two questions, right? And the short
Yeah.
answer part, right? You normally we say that it's the minimum would be like half a page, and then you move to the long answer questions or the essays where you write 2 pages. Did you do that?
Yeah, the first page was the first question, and then the second question was another page.
Hmm. Um, and inshallah, hopefully you have done what is required and a dash extra. Thank you, Khalid.
Doctor, may I speak?
By the way, I can recognize your voice. Did I teach you something before?
Yeah, last year ago, remember EL during the
Yeah,
summer?
112, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Nice meeting you again, Yakha.
You too, Doc.
Safaya, you were saying something.
A doctor, for me, for the essay, we can write as many bodies as we can, like if we want. Is it okay? Because I had two bodies, the introduction, two bodies, and the conclusion.
And 400 words. I mean, obviously the bodies are so fat. If you're
Yes,
writing only
doctor.
two paragraphs, it means every paragraph is so big, right? Okay,
Because
okay.
doctor, I tried to cover all the information that's said in the question. Because in the question they asked about the soliloquy of Iago and the perception how he looks at Othello. So I thought I can write all the important ones, like how he looks and then the soliloquy. So based on that, I divided into two parts, the first part and the second part, two bodies. So I had the introduction where there was the thesis statement, and then I had two bodies to divide them.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa will handle that, inshallah. You're with Dr. Mustafa, right? Okay, you are with him, right? Okay. Anybody else before we proceed? We're reflecting on the MTA experience, the good and the bad and the ugly. Hmm. Okay, right. Let's proceed. What is it that we have? We'll talk about, we're having a shift this time around. We're moving from the 18th century to the early 19th century. We're moving to the Romantic era. And let me put this disclaimer before we start. When I say romantic, I don't mean love relationships, people falling in love and eventually, and and subsequently getting married to each other. No, we're not talking about romance. We're talking about a romantic movement in the sense that it was wild, it was in its ideas, I mean, revolutionary even. So we're talking about this romantic sense. We're talking about, setting the imagination free, focusing on the inside of the poet and the individual. So we're having a paradigm shift. 18th century and even prior was all about decorum, was about following rules very strictly, and this is actually what defines good poets. Before the Romantics, it was all about organization. It was all about conformity. It was all about kind of following rules and regulations. If you follow those rules and regulations, you are good. If you're not, it means something is wrong. And they even applied that to literature. So if you're following the rules of the time when it comes to writing poetry or writing dramas, for example, you are a good poet. If you're not following, it means that your poetry will not be recognized and you're not going to be a poet according to them. So with the Romantics, it's a totally different experience. The Romantics are rebellious by nature. They rebelled against the existing guidelines. They said, no, we're not going to follow those rules. They don't apply to us. They don't even apply to the age in which we live. So they started their own rules, and simplicity is central and is a key. Their work was about being simple, but not simplistic, mind you. It is still very philosophical. It is still very profound. So what we're doing is the romantics, romantic poetry, and it's not only romantic poetry that we're having as a representation of the romantic movement and the romantic time. We also have a novel, Frankenstein. I'm sure lots of people have heard of Frankenstein. Frankenstein is a novel and it is romantic because of how strange and how wild and how unfamiliar it is. So these are the the issues that we normally tackle and handle when we talk about the romantics. We're going to start off with some romantic, pioneers like Wordsworth, like William Blake. These are all romantic poets, and nature is at the center and at the core of their poetry. Wordsworth is known as a poet of nature, and of course, by nature here we mean wild nature. We actually will have two kinds of natures, and let's see which type we are talking about when we talk about the romantics. We have um, organized nature. When we talk about a garden, for example, if we have a park and if you have a garden, of course, it has gates and it has a key. It has also somebody who takes care of it. So this is the concept of the garden that we're not talking about. We're talking about the jungle. With the romantics, we're talking about the jungle. So obviously, the jungle doesn't have doors, and of course, if it doesn't have doors, it doesn't have keys to those doors. It's open, it's up for grabs, right? It's a place where you have animals, perhaps neighboring human beings. I don't know. I don't believe that we have human beings in jungles, unless it's like what do they call it in Kenya and South Africa? They have those big
Cave people?
yeah, parks and national parks where you have animals and stuff. So what I'm trying to stress here is that we're talking about the romantics in the wild, natural sense, not on the organized sense. So if we are going to compare the nature of the 18th century to the nature of the 19th century or the nature of the romantics, there is going to be a big gap. People in the 18th century were rational, were using their own minds, were very organized. So we use the analogy of a garden with them. With the romantics, they are perhaps focused more on whatever is wild, whatever is natural. Natural for them means something that human beings didn't mess with. No, no, no. It's known in the literature that whenever human beings interfere in something, they kind of they distort it, they corrupt it. So they have this capacity for corruption and spoiling and destruction. So the Romantics said, no, we are talking about nature that is unspoiled and unmolested by the human being. And where can we find this kind of nature? We find it in the countryside. We find it in the desert, for example. Of course, they don't have desert back in England, but what they have is the countryside. And of course, in the countryside, you have wild nature. It's not the city, right? The city is full, according to them, is full of, ills and evils, social injustice. People are busy, they don't have time or tolerance for each other. So they try to fly away from this here and now, the here and the now of the city, and they go all the way to the countryside where life is simpler, where people are even simple. The people of the countryside are normally known to be they are not naive. Nobody is naive on this planet, but they are simple. Their way of life is simple. They don't have the sophistication of the city dwellers, people who live in the city. And again, there is an explanation for that. The Romantics say that they are simple because they live close to nature. So they get affected by pure nature. So nature here is a teacher, and it teaches people who are close by how to behave. How to behave, you behave in a pure way, in an innocent way, and also in a simple way. So people in the countryside are, I think, much simpler. If you come from the countryside, you know your people, you know how simple there are. And even when you visit, if you have a chance to visit the countryside, what we call El Dira here, for example. El Dira here is part of the countryside, right? If if you have, like grandparents who live in El Baha, who live in, let's say, in the south,
A
even
village?
in the, yeah, village life is much simpler, right? Have you ever had the experience of going and living in the countryside?
No, doctor.
Mm. Okay, so if you're given the opportunity much later in your life, mashallah, you're very young, you're going to enjoy it because it's very simple. Anyway, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're addressing. We're talking about a group of poets that we call the Romantics, whose focus is on glorifying the countryside, glorifying nature, celebrating nature, like they say in that literature. Celebrating nature means that we are enjoying to the full the simple things about nature. What do we have in wild nature? I'm asking everyone, what do we have in nature? Mountains? Absolutely, yes, we have mountains. What else? Rivers?
Waterfalls?
Yeah, waterfalls and
Deserts.
rivers. Yeah, well, sometimes you have a desert if it's a desert. But let's focus on the countryside of the Europeans. Obviously, they don't have desert like us in the Arab world or even in India, where you have in Rajasthan, you have the Thar Desert, for example, which is obviously the biggest. Um, okay, so we're talking about the countryside. Let's unpack the countryside. Let's talk about the components of the countryside. If you're saying rivers, this is correct. If you're saying mountains, this is also correct. If you're saying trees, if you're saying birds, if you say animals, for example, but not those very domesticated animals that we're familiar with, like the cat and the dog. Perhaps they have something bigger. They have elephants, they have cows, and they have sheep, right? This is the countryside. I mean, think about it. If you live by nature
Doctor, a farm?
and in nature, and if you live alongside with, you know, nice animals like the elephant or
Doctor, a farm?
yeah, but farms are also examples of pure and outside nature. So again, you will learn a thing or two from being close to nature, and this is the message that the romantics are trying to get across to us. The closer you are to nature, the more the purer you are, the more innocent, the more unassuming, the more humility you show towards other people, the more tolerant you are. So these are the messages that the Romantics are addressing in their poetry. And this is what we are also, analyzing in the poetry. Again, you would ask, uh, why with the Romantics we have a different type of poetry, right? So before the Romantics, especially in the 18th century and even prior, you have poetry that is very rigid. Rigid means that you don't have the freedom to write poetry the way you want. There is a certain pattern that you have to follow. There is a certain template that you have to use. You have to rhyme your poetry in a certain way. You have to use a certain rhythm and a certain meter. You have to use certain imagery. Even the vocabulary and the words that you're using shouldn't be the simple everyday vocabulary that everybody is using. No, you have to have what we call special diction. We call it poetic diction. It's poetry and words that we only use in poetry, which means that if you're not a poet, you're not likely to understand it. So 18th century poetry was sophisticated, to say the least. It wasn't, for everyone. It wasn't, and I think we even have taken an example when we talk about Alexander Pope in his very popular and famous poem, Essay on Man. Essay on Man is an example of disorganized, conformist poems and art, where you follow the rules, you follow the template, and you are on your way towards being recognized as a good poet. If you don't follow the rules, if you don't conform to the traditions of poetry writing, you're not a good poet according to them. So the romantics are obviously different. They say we need to revolutionize poetry. We need to write poetry in a different way because the poetry of the 18th century is the poetry of the 18th century. It shouldn't be the poetry of the 19th century because our times in the 19th century are different. Our issues and challenges and problems are different. Why would I take the template of the 18th century and apply it to 19th century when the issues are different, when the challenges are different? So they have a point there, as a matter of fact. So, what are some of the issues that they engaged in that they were trying to navigate in the 19th century? The 19th century was the time of the Industrial Revolution. And for all the beauty of the Industrial Revolution, because make no mistake about it, it did amazing things, but it still left behind, you know, bad consequences. Like if you have a machine, it means that you have to lay off lots of labor. Lots of people lost their jobs because a machine is now replacing them. And instead of having 10 people using their hands and their physical power, we now need one, and we're going to replace the 10 with only one machine. So the Industrial Revolution reduced people to poverty. Lots and lots of people, hundreds and perhaps thousands of people lost their jobs. And obviously, when you lose your job, you become and your family become poor. You don't have access to food or and other life necessities. So and also if you're poor and you don't have access to food and you need to survive, what is it that you think of? Perhaps you think of crime, you think of committing crime, you think of stealing. Okay, so you will have more criminals because of the economic situation, and it's all because of the industrial revolution. So people were not happy. People were obviously poor. They didn't know what to do. So there was a lot of suffering in the 19th century. There was a lot of agony. People were agonizing. They didn't know what to do. Okay, so the Romantics came and they said, no, this is not fair. And we need to talk about that. We need to portray this in our poetry. Uh, Governments, perhaps, and people in general need to know that the Industrial Revolution is not all good news. No, no. We need to realize that with the Industrial Revolution came also capitalism, and capitalism is a monster, a big one. I mean, it's easy for them to kind of lay off hundreds and thousands of people, like they are doing now with AI, for example, where Amazon, I heard the other day that they are laying off thousands of their employees. Again, this is capitalism, and it started with the Industrial Revolution, and this is what the Romantics were against. So their poetry is revolutionary in themes and in topics and ideas. Okay, they were making statements against the injustice that was meted out against people. Okay, with the Industrial Revolution, you have people migrating from the countryside and going to the cities where the factories are. And this is obviously going to create some kind of imbalance between the countryside and the city. Lots of the lands that we have in the countryside are going to be sold out to capitalists, and they are going to build like factories on them. And obviously, this is taking away from the wealth of lands that every country is boasting about. I mean, normally, the more land you have, the more cultivatable land you have, the more proud you are. Again, these are some of the themes that the Romantics were talking about. They are celebrating the countryside. They are celebrating the beauty of the countryside, the simplicity of the countryside, and they are also at the same time lamenting the time when life was easier, when life was more simple before the Industrial Revolution. And of course, they are laying bare uh, um, the injustices, and they are exposing the very bad practices of and the industrialists who started this industrial revolution. So it's not only themes and ideas that they are revolutionizing, they are also revolutionizing the form, how poems are written. So in the past, poems were written as according to a rigid organization and order. You need to study the poem so that you can imitate it. Imitation was key. So it's not about being creative and original as much as it is about being uh, um, imitative. This was in the 18th century. When the Romantics came, they said no. We should be creative. We don't have to follow rigid structures and patterns. We write poetry the way we want. We need to make our poetry simpler, more accessible to people, which they did, at least in with the first generation of Romantic poets, when poetry was simple, was short, and of course we're going to transition to the second generation poets when we talk about Keats and Shelley, where poetry gets to be more mythologized, where they use myth and legends, and that can be from England, from the Scandinavian countries, can be even from India. So it started to get complicated, but this is perhaps the subject of another day. So the Romantics are a group of poets who are more or less social reformers. They are trying to reform society. They think that society has gone so far in its material cupidity. The focus is now on money. The focus is now on industry. The focus is now on petty things. The focus is now on being artificial, staying away from nature. So they wanted to restore nature to people, the wild, uh, simple kind of nature. The first poet that we're going to talk about is Wordsworth, and Wordsworth is uh, um, a romantic poet and who is also known as the poet of nature. And again, it's capital N. We're talking about the nature of the countryside. We're talking about the jungle. No, we're not talking about the garden. We're not talking about the park where you have gates or doors and they have keys. No, we're talking about something that is up for grabs. حمى we call it حتى في الأدب العربي يقول لك الحمى. حمى is a place that is not owned by anyone, where you can see animals and human beings and perhaps coexisting. This is the jungle, right? Okay. Let's move on. Okay, but perhaps before we do that, I just want to make sure that you guys can distinguish poetry from non-poetry. When you see a piece of work, what are the characteristics of poetry? When you see a poem from afar, how can you recognize a poem and you say this is a poem, this is not perhaps a paragraph in a novel or a short story, this is not um, a scene or a speech in a play. Let's talk about what distinguishes poetry from the other genres. Sophia.
Doctor, for me, I think rhyming words at the ending, realizing those rhyming words, I guess that can be a poem.
Yeah, poetry is musical, right? Which means that it has music, and this music can be at the borders of I mean, at the end of the lines, where you normally have like two lines rhyming together, having the same sound, or three lines having the same sound. You have alternating sounds, and the first and the third, and the third, and the fifth, and so on. So rhyming is very important, and with rhyme comes, of course, music. And yeah, thank you, Sophia. Lujain. What
The
else?
pattern of the poem is different than scenes. The arrangement, some of it comes in a lyrical word, a lyrical shape, where it's like written, for example, about, for example, learning. Some poems will be written in the letter L, or maybe in the shape of a triangle, or a shape of two lines or three stanzas.
Yeah. Like Lujain is saying, from afar, when you look at a poem, you see that it is not, in terms of how it is laid out on the page, it's not margin to margin like a paragraph in a novel, for example, right?
Yes,
You don't have this margin to margin setup for a poem. Poems are normally in the middle of the page, and sometimes they have this perhaps deliberate length inconsistency, if you like, where sometimes the lines are long. I mean, a long line followed by a short line and then long line again. It depends on how the poet sees it. Again, those are the romantics, which means they don't really care for conformity when it comes to the shape of the poem. So the takeaway from what Lujani is saying here is that the lines are not the lines that we see in a paragraph where we have this margin to margin lines. The lines are sometimes long and some other times short within the self same stanza, within the self same poem. What else? that we have in
After the
poetry and
recitation of the
perhaps
poem,
what?
the recitation, like how the poem is said, and for example, in the music you have a tone, and in poem you have another tone to say the poem in a special way. Like there are many patterns.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this idea of in deliberate inconsistency when it comes to the arrangement of the lines. And also, if you look at every and each line, obviously, English is a subject, verb, rest of the sentence kind of language where you have normally you have the subject and then the verb and then the rest of the sentence. Um, for effect, you may have an inversion where they start with the verb, or perhaps they can start even with the object, number three. Okay, so this is something that we're not used to in normal language. In normal language, the trajectory is subject, verb, and then the rest of the sentence. In uh, in poetry, we have what we call fronting, where sometimes the verb or even the end of the sentence comes and becomes number one in the sentence. Uh, let's have, for example, in a normal everyday sentences, you would say, "I love thee." Thee means you, or "I love you." In a poem, you may see it, "thee I love." And obviously, here, having thee or having you is meant to perhaps stress how much the poet or the persona of the poet loves his lady love. So this is a small example of how you can have this inversion where you don't normally start with the subject. So again, this is not a lack of grammar knowledge. This is deliberate and it is meant to send certain messages. So this is something that we don't see in novels. We don't see in essays where we have to stick to the order of the sentence, subject, and then verb, and then the rest of the sentence. So what else about poetry that we don't have in other genres? Do we have special vocabulary, special diction? Yeah, sometimes we do, right? Sometimes you have, like I said, um, you, which is obviously everyday English, becomes thee, right? And you have thine, and you have um, so many words that we're going to need together, where obviously these are not words that we normally use. And even in description, sometimes they use words that we're not used to in our normal everyday life. And of course, you have imagery, you have figures of speech, you have analogies, you have comparisons. So these are things that you don't normally see in normal discourse and normal conversations. Um, what is perhaps interesting also about poetry is that it is very philosophical. Philosophical in the sense that you don't understand a poem right from the first reading. You need to engage with the poem, you need to read it more than once so that you can grasp the meaning. And even though you may kind of read it so many times, sometimes, like they say in Arabic, المعنى في بطن الشاعر, which means that you come up with your own meaning and your own interpretation, which does not necessarily mean that this is the meaning that the poet had in mind. But that's fine. Okay, everyone can come up with his own meanings. But of course, there are course that we all agree on. So again, poetry is very philosophical. Philosophical in the sense that you have the surface meaning, whatever meets the eye, and you have a deeper, more profound meaning that you have to think of, where you bring your own experience to the poem, your knowledge, and then you come up with a synthesis when it comes to the meaning. It becomes bigger than what meets the eye. So philosophical and also intellectual, because contrary to popular belief, poetry is not all about emotions and feelings. Poetry is about engaging the mind. You need to think so that you can understand and appreciate the poem. So, poetry is perhaps the most intellectual of the arts, where you need to think and think deeply about what you read or hear. Okay, so this is poetry in a nutshell. Now let's move to the first poem. And the first poem that we have is the first poem that we have is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, or the Daffodils. I'm sure lots of you may have done it back at school or whatever. When I say the I wander lonely as a cloud, does it ring any bells? The Daffodils. Have you done it at any point in your life? I wandered lonely as a cloud, or I wandered lonely as a cloud. Okay. So you haven't, okay? So let's first of all, before we dig deep into the poem and try to unpack it, let's agree on some of the tenets of Romanticism. What is it that we're going to see in their poetry? We're going to see a celebration of nature, where a poet is talking about the different elements of nature and is celebrating and glorifying them, talking about how beautiful they are, how nice they are, how he feels seeing them, looking at them, touching them, staying within them. If we consider the countryside an element of nature, so staying there gives you sensations that you can never imagine. Very beautiful, very pure, and everything in between. So one thing about the Romantics and their poetry is that you're going to see this celebration of nature. And how does this happen? When you see the poet talks about or talk about the different elements of nature, rivers, mountains, animals, birds. What other elements are we going to see in the poetry, um, which may come perhaps later? You have this engagement with the supernatural. Um, we're going to also see the romantics talk about their inner selves, what happens inside them. There is going to be a measure of self-expression where they talk about the inner recesses of the human soul. They are not anymore holding a mirror to nature, reflecting whatever happens as is. No. They are not holding a mirror like the 18th century poets are doing anymore. They are talking about what happens inside them, the effect and the impact of nature on them, and how it transforms and changes them to the better, I hope. Again, we also talk about the impact of nature on their poetry, and how their poetry is a reflection of this passion and love that they have for outside nature. And this is something that we're going to see with the first romantic poet that we're dealing with, and his name is Wordsworth, William Wordsworth. Let's go to him. Okay, so this is William Wordsworth, and we're doing with the chapter that says or reads William Wordsworth, Poet in a Landscape. So, poet, we know. Okay, what do we mean by landscape? You know what landscape is, right? Landscape. Um, Landscape is nature, right? So, which kind of
Yes.
nature are we addressing? We're talking about the nature of the countryside. Okay. So, obviously, if the title of the book or the title of the chapter is as such, you can expect to have a poet who is immersed in nature. His whole experience revolves around being close to nature, engaging with nature, moving and living wholesale in the countryside, and uh, grappling with the idea of whether he will be accepted among the people of nature in the countryside or not. This is the bulk of his poetry, celebrating nature and its different elements and the effect of nature on him, on his psyche, and again asking those questions as whether he will be accepted or not. I mean, he at one point he decides to go and leave the city behind and live in and by nature. And of course, nature there is occupied. It has people over there, the people of the countryside, and he has this uh, um, concern that they may not accept him. He has this idea of whether he will be accepted by them or he is going to forever remain a stranger. Okay, so where did he live? He lived in a cottage called Dove Cottage, and obviously, uh, when we talk about cottages and lakes, we're talking about elements of nature. Again, this is what people know about Wordsworth. I mean, they normally associate him with the Lake District, and with Dove Cottage. Again, these are all elements of nature. And see, this is where he used to live. What do you notice about these places? You notice that this is outside nature, right? You notice that it's lovely over there. You notice that it doesn't have human beings, which is obviously good news for them. Again, because of the idea that human beings, they mess with nature and they spoil it and corrupt it. So we're talking about, again, poetry. And when we talk about poetry and when we talk about poems, this is the poem, for example. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Again, when you read a poem, you need to deal with it on two levels. You have the formal level where you focus on the form, and you have the thematic level where you focus on the ideas that come out of the poem. The form means that you're going to focus on, I'm not sure if I'm sharing. Let me share because I'm not sharing, obviously. Can you see that? Hello.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a
Yes,
poem.
doctor.
No, yes or no?
Yes, doctor. Yes.
Yes, good. So this is a poem, for example, whereas you can see it's not margin to margin. The lines are between short and long. right? This is a typical poem, and this is a typical romantic poem. Again, in order to fully understand and appreciate the poem, you need, first of all, read it. You need to also start by engaging with the form, the rhyme, the rhythm, the music, the imagery, and then from there you proceed to and transition to the meaning. Sometimes the meaning is not even important. Okay, so what is it that we're going to do now? I would like you to read the poem and tell me what you have understood. Keep in mind that this is a romantic poem by a romantic poet, and the romantic poet is none other than William Wordsworth, who was a poet of nature, whose house and perhaps village we have just seen, Dove Cottage and Lake District. Again, those places have inspired his poetry. Again, his poetry is all about being close to nature, is about being as pure and as innocent as nature, are all about, you know, portraying and communicating the impact and the effect of pure nature on the human being. Okay, now I would like us to read the poem on our own. I'll give you 4 minutes to read it and understand it, and then we will talk about it. Please remember that this is a romantic poem where you're likely to see elements of romanticism in it. Yalla, go ahead. You guys have 4 minutes from now. Read it. Okay. So what do we have to say about this poem? Okay. So first of all, let me ask you this question. Do you think this is a romantic poem? Yeah, go
Yes,
ahead. Yeah, Lujay, go ahead.
I think it's a romantic poem because it represented nature, including how even the poet himself.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. The fact that there is this direct address to elements of nature, right? Yeah, okay. So, Sophia?
Doctor, for me, I think he's praising like he's appreciating the nature and feeling the emotions because they're in the end, I think he said, and the pleasure, something with hills and the daffodils. So in the end, he's trying to show the emotions, like how the nature feels like. He's lost in the wonders of the nature.
Yeah, which makes it a romantic poem. Remember,
Yes, doctor, yes.
romanticism is about celebrating nature,
It's like he's fallen in
engaging.
love or something like he's appraising the nature. So it's something like that, the feelings in him.
Okay, so it's about engaging with the elements of nature. Yeah,
Yes.
like Hur is saying he is, um, celebrating nature and appreciating nature. How, how can you come to the mic and pronounce it for us? Okay. Uh, okay. So, what do you think of the level? What do you think of the language? Is it difficult? Did you? Okay, Lujai?
I think the language overall is okay, but there are some words that are difficult to understand.
Yeah, but overall, you could negotiate your way through, right? It wasn't that
Yes,
you could navigate the poem, right? Again,
yes.
uh, and this is also another romantic element, at least with the first generation romantic poets. Their poetry was accessible and easy to understand. Okay, so what's the idea? What's happening? What is the persona of the poem talking about? Obviously, and this is very important, when we talk about people in a poem, they don't necessarily have to be the poet himself. So we're making this distinction between the poet and the persona of the poet. The persona of the poet is the one who talks in the poem. So, what is happening with this persona of the poem? What's going on in the poem? Lujay.
In the poem, at the beginning, the poet himself represented himself as a lonely cloud. But after seeing the beauty of nature, things became way better for him. He felt relieved from the loneliness he felt.
Um, I'm, I'm, I beg to differ here. Loneliness here does not mean that he is estranged and he is alienated. Lonely here means on his own. So it's not the 21st century sense of the word. So this time around, lonely here means on his own, alone. So I wandered lonely as a cloud. It means I was by myself. Okay. So does this tell us something about the poet? Yes. Does it tell us something about that romantic poet? Absolutely. The fact that he thrives, he or she, of course, he thrives in solitude. He celebrates and loves solitude. Solitude means being alone. So it's not that he is sad and he is friendless. No, it's just that he feels that he is more on his own and at ease when he is alone. So I wondered, lonely as a cloud. Lonely here does not indicate or does not suggest that I mean what everybody knows about the word lonely in its 21st century sense. Lonely here means he was alone and obviously enjoying this kind of loneliness, this kind of solitude, like all romantics are. Um, so I wandered lonely as a cloud. So the title is very significant because it's you have the I of the poem, the persona of the poem, I. Okay, wandered, and when you think of the word wonder, it means that you move around, you move unfettered, you don't have anything that cripples or limits you. Again, as a cloud, and that would complete the image. Obviously, when you are a cloud, you are high in the sky, nothing is limiting you. It's like being a bird. So, clouds or birds are flying, nothing is regulating or controlling them. It gives you this sense of freedom, right? If you're a cloud, where are you likely to be if you're a cloud? Over and above, right? Not down. So obviously, no traffic. You're above, no traffic. This was the time before aeroplanes, right? So you fly away from the here and the now, right? Like a bird, like a cloud. So I wandered lonely as a cloud. What a feeling, what a sensation. Okay, and when you go down to the poem itself, what do we see? Is he wandering as a cloud, and what is it that he encounters and sees? Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah, Sophia.
Doctor, for me, I think
N-
he's being
Can
by
can you
himself.
stop? Can you stop using for me and go straight to whatever you're saying?
Okay, okay. I'm
Don't
sorry,
don't
doctor.
use for me anymore.
Okay.
Can you promise me this?
Yes, I promise,
Yeah,
doctor. I
yeah,
promise
yeah,
you.
yeah. Go ahead. With
Okay,
me
I
and with
think
anybody else. I mean, you're doing an excellent job without for me. Yeah, go on.
okay. I think that like he's feeling the nature by himself. For
Which
example,
you mean he's
he's saying
appreciating and savoring nature.
yes.
He's
For example, he's
enjoying
saying
every
the
bit
Milky
of
Way,
it.
about the 10,000 sky stars in the sky and the Milky Way. So he's being by himself and appreciating the nature. Like he's roaming around, seeing the nature and appreciating. So he thought of to write a poem about it. So
Nice.
he's like being himself in the nature, looking
And
around, seeing the wonders. So that's how he thought of writing a poem.
okay. So again, we're talking about the poet or the persona engaging with the different elements of nature. What are those different elements of nature that we're talking about? What did he meet?
He's
What?
talking about the stars in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's talking about the daffodils, like the pleasure he feels, and then he's talking about the hills,
Mm-hmm.
and then the sky, the blue sky. Like he's really praising the nature. Like he's seeing many things, like in the morning, the night, the evening, the sunrise, and these things. So he's like praising the nature.
Yeah. Can we drop that? Because with nature, we don't use that. He is praising nature. He is celebrating and enjoying nature, right? Okay. Anybody
Yes.
else? So again, it's not only about encountering those elements. It's also about having filling yourself with those sweet sensations. It's um, a smell of fresh air, if you like. And when he finishes this kind of wonder, this kind of trip that he was on, he goes home and then he sits or perhaps lies down and then he starts to reflect on what he has seen in nature. And this reflection goes into him and he processes it with his mind. And what is the result? What is the end result? Is that he comes up with very beautiful poems. See? So we're starting from nature and we're going to the human being, the inside, the psyche, and the inner recesses of the human being. And the result is a very beautiful poem that we call The Daffodils. See? The effect of outside nature on the human being. So, what is he likely to learn from nature? Obviously, he's going to learn to be a different human being. He's going to learn to be peaceful. He's going to be non-violent. He's going to feel perhaps more relaxed, more creative, right? Wanting to produce and write poetry. So this is obviously the effect of nature on the poet. It transforms him like nothing does, right? It's a
Doctor, he's
very
even
pure.
being cautious as well for protecting the nature.
I mean, obviously, he didn't talk about having those protective instincts because I mean, nature was not being threatened, at least at the time when the poem was written. Again, we're talking about the sensations that people feel and poets feel when they are close to nature. Again, we're stressing the fact that this is an example of a poem about nature, pure nature, where the persona of the poem is wandering on his own. Again, what is so romantic about the poem spoke about the idea that the whole poem is about engaging with elements of nature like waves, like rivers, like birds, like mountains, okay? And also about this feeling of being on your own, being alone. Obviously, because the romantics enjoy and appreciate solitude, being alone, enjoying and savoring nature, and then reflecting on the whole experience, reflecting on the senses and the sweet things and the sweet sensations that you generated and garnered out of this engagement with nature. What is the end result? What is the outcome of this encounter between man and nature? It's poetry, good poetry that we call romantic poetry. Okay? Again, you cannot separate the poem from its background. So if you talk about, you know, well, Wordsworth as a romantic poet of nature, you would need to also highlight the fact that he decided at one point to leave the city and go and live in the countryside among simple people, enjoying the beauties, the simple beauties of life and nature. And he produced poems that talk about that. And one of those poems is, of course, uh, uh, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Okay, so what we're going to do now is that we're going to dig deep into the archives of Wordsworth and see how this poem came into being. Okay, if he has a diary, normally if you are a poet or an artist, you have a notepad and you normally make an outline of the poems that you want to produce and stuff. So let's check if he has a diary or a journal. No, he doesn't. He doesn't have a diary. But what he has is a natural diary, like a house that we call Dove Cottage. We have the whole district, Lake District, where we can tell that if he decided to go and live in a place as pure as this one, it means that he loves nature. He doesn't want to be entangled in the hustle and bustle of city life where there is fume, where there is pollution, where there is the invisible hand of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. So these things you can find in his house, in where he chose to have a house. Okay, so he doesn't have a physical diary, but perhaps somebody else has or does. And obviously, we're talking about his sister, Dorothy. His sister obviously was living with him, and she kept a journal or a diary, and in which she would jot down what happens, perhaps on a daily basis. And when we checked the diary, we found her talk about the self same occasion. She is also talking about the time when she and Wordsworth went on a trip and they have seen daffodils. And so, who should we believe? Should we believe Wordsworth and his persona, who said that I was on my own and I was alone, or should we believe his sister? Obviously, his sister is kind of honest in her rendering of what happened because she wouldn't lie. I mean, so we get to know through the diary of Dorothy, the sister of Wordsworth, that he wasn't alone actually. Okay, but he, with his poetic, poets are like that. They imagine things sometimes. He imagined or he thought of himself as being on his own, alone, in order to enjoy the moment. But in actual fact, he wasn't alone. He was with his sister and perhaps among other people. Okay? So this is what we found out, that he was not alone. But again, he is the romantic poet who thrives in and flourishes and enjoys being alone, being in solitude. That's why he said, I was alone. Because poets are, even if they are among people, they are isolated, they have their own worlds. What else? The difference between the diary of Dorothy and the poem is that the poem is a public act. When a poet writes, he means his poetry to be spread, for people to know about it. But diaries are personal things. You keep it to yourself. You don't allow people to see it. There are different entries, I mean. Again, that would also point to the fact that she is a woman uh, uh, um, in the 19th century, where women were obviously not given the recognition that they rightly deserve. Women were not treated very well. So obviously, um, she kept the diary to herself, and nobody knew about it. What perhaps popularized the diary was the fact that scholars started to dig deep into the archives of Wordsworth and his family in order to know more about him and about the creation process and the creative process that he was engaged in. Other than that, her diary and whatever she wrote would have been kept hidden forever. Again, it's the power of the male in a male dominated society who is also a public figure, a gigantic figure, poet, a male poet with whatever facilities, whatever facilities that come with it. And she's a woman in the 19th century. She's writing something private. Diaries and journals are normally private. Nobody have access to them. See? So again, as a poet, he is asserting himself by kind of publishing the poem, by thinking of himself and nobody else, and by believing that he was on his own and nobody was with him. But again, when you read the diary, this is a totally different experience. It's with the diary, the experience is collective. It's a group tour that included Wordsworth and Dorothy and perhaps somebody else. So it wasn't an I for Dorothy. It was we. It was a we. Okay. So in terms of voice, so we have the I. Well, obviously, we're talking about the daffodil sort. I wandered lonely as a cloud. So voice, I eventually identified as a poet, and there isn't much social context given, as you can see. If you look at the diction or the words, they are simple and direct, and the meter is iambic tetrameter, and the rhyme scheme is A B A B A B C C, and of course it's lyrical. It's a lyrical poem uh, um, devoted to expressing his mood, which is obviously single. It's normally lyrical poems or short poems devoted to expressing a single mood or moment of consciousness, usually personal, where you have the poet as a speaker. And again, the argument is very simple. You have three stages, and you have their correspondence in terms of stanzas. You have, stage one, where we have a description of the experience. And then stage two is the poet's immediate reaction to the experience. And then how the experience or the reaction and the sensation lingered and continued to work within the poet's memory and consciousness. So the poem here describes how experiences or experiencing natural beauty can enter, work within, and can, kind of benefit individual minds. Um, Again, when we read the poem, we can also read it in a biographical way, which means that we go and dig deep into the life of the poet and see how he used to live and the kind of challenges that he met. So when you talk obviously about Wordsworth, we talk about the lake as Altswater when this experience took place in 1802. And we also go to Dorothy's journal, and the time when it was all composed. And then we start to strike those comparisons between the poem and the journal. Clearly, both accounts refer to the same experience of seeing a mass of daffodils in flower growing along the margins of a lake under the trees and being blown about by high wind. They also share some of the same ways of describing the experience, especially the tendency to think of the daffodils as behaving like people, and describing them as dancing, being happy and gay. Again, they are obviously different in some way. Dorothy's account, of course, is in prose, not poetry, and of course conforms to the genre, which is diary writing, um, the conforming to the genre and function of a journal, which is to recount the events and experiences of the day, more or less in the order in which they happened. Again, one of the differences is that a journal is an essentially private form of writing and is never meant to be published. So we're obviously making this distinction between private writing by a woman living at the turn of the 19th century and the public conscious and ambitious self inscription of a romantic male poet. It makes all the difference, I promise you. Um, Again, you would focus uh, on the poet and the persona of the poet, um, and again on this idea of inwardness and privacy when it comes to Dorothy and her journal. What do we know about the journal or about this particular journal entry? We know that it's full of everyday detail, information, and observations which are not evidently ranked by importance. But the poem is different. The poem is lyrical and is meant to be published. So while Dorothy describes this as a shared experience, the poem foregrounds a romantic I who wanders alone and is disconnected. He is more of a cloud than a human being, um, and who is identified as a poet. We needed the journal to also certify the poem to say that this is what happened was true, which it did. Again, what it didn't prove, or perhaps what it refutes, was the fact that this claim to immediacy and memorability, Wordsworth seems to have needed to be reminded of this experience when he came to draft the poem at least 2 years after the journal entry was made. Again, a number of takeaways from this comparison between the the journal and the poem. Uh, it shows us that with poems, we have this interest in dramatizing the figure of the poet, and also this interest in the workings and solace of memory as a foundation of identity. So, in very simple terms, the comparison shows that the figure of the solitary poet genius is a fiction. The making of the poem was, in fact, a collaborative enterprise. So this is basically what I wanted to say or talk about when it comes to Wordsworth. When we meet again, we will talk more about him and about his other poems. If you have any questions before we call it a night.
No questions, clear, doctor.
Okay, don't forget that you have the second quiz. It's on Sunday. And of course, you know the time, and you will come to the university to do the quiz. You will have to go to your branch and do the quiz over there. The quiz, you will have two questions. One on the romantics, on Wordsworth, to be more specific, focus on the daffodils, and the other is on Candide. And we have done Candide so well, and you know it in and out. Yalla, I wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.